Welcome to Sleepy Love Tales, soothing romantic stories to help you relax and fall asleep. Let us know where you're listening from in the comments. If soft, heartfelt tales help you unwind, be sure to subscribe so you never miss a moment of calm. Now, let's begin tonight's story. Racing Hearts. The silence that followed a race was a sound all its own. It was a hollow ringing in Luca Rivera's ears, the ghost of 1,000 screaming RPMs. In the concrete tomb of the underground parking garage, the only other sound was the metallic ping 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 of his said Mustang's cooling engine, a sound like a slowly calming heart. His heart. He leaned against the pony's flank, the metal still warm through his leather jacket, and dragged a hand through his sweat-damp hair. He'd won, he always won, but the victory felt as empty as the echoing cavern around him. This was his escape, the one place he could outrun the ghosts that haunted his family name. Then a new sound, the soft scuff of a shoe against grit. He straightened instantly, every muscle coiling. Cops didn't scuff, rival crews didn't linger into the shadows. They announced themselves with revving engines and blinding headlights. This was different, quiet, measured. A figure detached itself from the gloom behind a thick concrete pillar. A woman. She held a phone up, the lens aimed not at him, but at the rear of his car, at his license plate. In 3 long strides he closed the distance, his hand clamping gently but firmly around her wrist. The phone clattered to the ground. Her gasp was a sharp, stolen breath in the heavy air. "You're either very brave or very stupid," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that seemed to be absorbed by the concrete. He looked down at her, the wide, startled eyes that reflected the flickering fluorescent light above. She wasn't dressed like a cop or a gearhead. She wore a tailored blazer and dark jeans, a stark contrast to the grit and grime of his world. Her chin lifted, a flicker of defiance chasing the fear from her eyes. "Maybe both," she shot back, her voice steadier than he expected. "Just like you." He let a slow smile touch his lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. He released her wrist, watching as she rubbed the spot, never breaking his gaze. He bent and retrieved her phone, holding it between 2 fingers like a piece of evidence. Photographing license plates in a place like this, that's a good way to get yourself hurt. "I'm a law student," she said, the words precise, as if she were building a case. "I'm researching illegal street racing for a white paper on prosecutorial strategy." He almost laughed. "A law student. You couldn't find a book?" "Books don't have the smell of burnt rubber and motor oil," she countered, her gaze sweeping the garage. "They don't capture the echo of footsteps in a place that feels like it's holding its breath. I needed to understand the environment." Her words struck a chord. She saw the poetry in the grime, the tension in the silence. He handed the phone back to her, their fingers brushing. A spark, low and electric, arced between them. He felt it. He saw in the slight parting of her lips that she did too. It was an unwelcome jolt, a current he had no business feeling, especially not with a woman who represented everything he was running from. Rules, order, the law. "Eva Santos," she said, extending a hand as if they were meeting at a cocktail party instead of a clandestine crime scene. He hesitated before taking it. Her hand was cool, her grip surprisingly firm. "Luca Rivera." The name hung in the air between them. He saw the shift in her eyes, a flicker of recognition that went beyond his reputation in the racing scene. It was a deeper, older acknowledgement. A shadow. Santos, Rivera. The names were relics of a past their parents had written, a history of tangled alliances and bitter betrayals in the city's criminal underworld. His father had gone legit, turning his mechanical skills into a thriving garage business. Her family, he knew, had not been so successful in their escape. "Rivera," she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. The magnetic pull that had crackled between them was now charged with something heavier. Danger. History. "You know the name," he stated, not a question. "My father knew your father," she said carefully, withdrawing her hand. The warmth was gone. "A long time ago." The unspoken words filled the space between them. "Before my family fell apart. Before yours scrubbed itself clean." Eva's carefully constructed world of legal statutes and scholarly articles had just collided with the raw, visceral reality she was only supposed to be observing. She had come here for research, to understand the mindset of men like Luca Rivera. But she hadn't expected to find a piece of her own broken history waiting for her in the shadows. He watched her, this woman who was a walking contradiction, a law student drawn to the lawless, a Santos who flinched at the name Rivera. She was looking at him with an unnerving mix of academic curiosity and something far more personal, something that felt dangerously like understanding. And in that moment, under the hum of a dying fluorescent bulb, Luca felt a different kind of risk, one that had nothing to do with hairpin turns and everything to do with the collision course he was on with Eva Santos. The attraction was mutual, undeniable, and it screamed a warning that for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure he wanted to heed. Eva's safe space smelled of old paper, brewing coffee, and rain. The Law Library Cafe was her sanctuary, a fortress of logic and precedent where the chaotic ghosts of her family's past couldn't reach her. Ordinarily, the steady scratch of her pen on a legal pad was a comforting rhythm, the soundtrack to her ambition. But today the rhythm was off. Her mind wasn't on contracts and torts. It was in a concrete garage, filled with the scent of motor oil and the low rumble of a man's voice. Luca Rivera. She stared at her laptop, the screen illuminating a dozen articles, forum posts and grainy race videos. He was a phantom, a legend in the city's underbelly. His driving was described as fearless, poetic, reckless. But as she dug deeper, a different picture emerged. Rivera and Sons Automotive, a legitimate, respected business. Customer testimonials praised Luca's almost supernatural diagnostic skills. He wasn't just a thug in a fast car, he was a master mechanic, an artist with a wrench and a wiring diagram. He was a man of two worlds, just as she was. He ran a legal business by day and broke the law by night. She studied the law by day, while the shadow of her family's lawlessness clung to her. A notification popped up on a social media page she was scrolling through. A friend of a friend had posted a photo from a car show months ago. In the background, leaning against a polished engine block, was Luca. He was laughing, head thrown back, a genuine, unguarded expression that made her breath catch. It was a world away from the wary, intense man in the garage. The bell above the cafe door chimed, pulling her from her digital rabbit hole. And then, the scent of motor oil and rain-damp leather filled the air, so potent it felt like a memory come to life. Luca Rivera stood there, shaking the water from his jacket, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. For a moment, the entire cafe seemed to fade into the background. He moved with a quiet confidence that was utterly out of place among the hunched-over students and steaming mugs. He approached her table, pulling up a chair without asking. "Fancy meeting you here," he said, his lips curling into that same wry, unsettling smile. Eva closed her laptop slowly. "Stalking me, Rivera?" "Let's call it a follow-up inquiry," he countered, his gaze dropping to her scattered books. "I find myself in need of some legal advice, on a hypothetical matter, of course." The game was set. She leaned back, crossing her arms, playing her part. "My consultation fees are steep." "I'm sure they are." He leaned forward, his forearms resting on the table, closing the space between them. The air grew thick with a tension that was part interrogation, part flirtation. Hypothetically, if a person were to be present at an event where certain traffic violations occurred, what would their exposure be? "Hypothetically," Eva began, her voice cool and professional, "it would depend on their level of involvement." Were they a spectator, an organizer, a participant? What if they were just there, he asked, his dark eyes holding hers, searching for something beyond the legal jargon. Watching a woman take pictures of their license plate. Her carefully constructed walls, the ones built from case law and precedent, began to show cracks. This wasn't a game of cat and mouse. This was a man trying to understand her motives, just as she was trying to understand his. She saw him tracing the rim of his coffee cup, his mechanic's hand surprisingly graceful. He'd found out who she was, a Santos. He knew the history, the danger inherent in their proximity, and yet he was here. "You're not what I expected," she admitted, the words escaping before her logic could stop them. He stilled. "What did you expect?" "Someone reckless, someone loud. I expected you to run when you heard my name." "Neither are you," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "I expected a girl playing with fire. I didn't expect the fire to be in her." The rain streaked down the window pane beside them, blurring the world outside, cocooning them in the small, quiet space. The steam rising from their cups felt like a veil. "And for the record," he added, "I've never run from anything." It was a lie, and they both knew it. He was running from something. So was she. They were just running in different directions. He raced toward physical danger to outrun emotional pain, while she retreated into the safety of the law to escape the chaos of her bloodline. Eva felt a reluctant fascination bloom in her chest, a dangerous curiosity that her well-honed survival instincts screamed at her to ignore. Luca Rivera was a complication she couldn't afford. He was a living, breathing reminder of the world her mother had chosen, a world that had ended in prison sentences and a shattered childhood. But he was also something else. He was a man who looked at her not as the daughter of a criminal, but as a fire. And for the first time Eva felt the warmth. "One drive." The words came from Eva's mouth before she could second-guess them. They were standing outside the cafe a week later, the city air thick with the promise of an evening storm. "Just one," she clarified, her gaze firm. "No racing, no breaking the law, just driving." Luca's expression softened, the hard edges of his usual vigilance smoothing away. He nodded slowly. "Just joying." He didn't take her to the neon-slicked streets of the downtown grid. Instead, he drove the Mustang out of the city, the engine a steady, comforting purr as they climbed into the canyon roads. The setting sun bled across the sky in hues of orange and violet, painting the landscape in strokes of impossible beauty. With the windows down, the wind whipped through Eva's hair, carrying the scent of sage and dry earth. It felt like shedding a skin, leaving the concrete and the expectations of the city behind. They didn't talk much at first. There was only the hum of the engine, the whisper of the wind, and the shared space inside the vintage car. He drove with an effortless grace, his hands light on the wheel, a stark contrast to the reckless abandon she'd seen in the videos. This wasn't a race. It was a meditation. He pulled over at a scenic overlook, the entire city glittering below them like a carpet of fallen stars. He cut the engine, and the silence that rushed in was different from the hollow quiet of the garage. This was a peaceful silence, vast and alive. He turned to her, his profile outlined by the dying light. "My brother died in a car crash," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of all its usual defences. He wasn't racing. He was on his way home from his community college class. A drunk driver ran a red light. Eva's heart clenched. She said nothing, knowing this was a story that needed silence to be told. "I was 16. He was everything I wasn't. Steady, responsible, the good son. After he was gone, everyone looked at me like I was the one who was supposed to have died. The reckless one, the one who took too many risks." He stared out at the sprawling lights below. "So, I started racing. It was the one place where I could be in complete control, every turn, every shift. It was my decision. In the car I felt alive, More than that, I felt like I could outrun the feeling that I destroy everything I touch. The confession hung between them, raw and profoundly vulnerable. Eva felt her own walls crumble, not just crack. She saw him then, not as a daredevil, but as a man trying to heal a wound so deep it had reshaped his entire world. Her own story rose to the surface, a truth she rarely shared. "When I was 12, she began, her voice trembling slightly, "my mother was sentenced to 7 years in prison. She was an accessory. She fell in love with a man, one of my father's associates, who was charming and dangerous and promised her the world. She chose him over her own family, over me. She chose a dangerous love, and it cost her everything." Eva wrapped her arms around herself. "I promised myself I would never be that stupid. I would never love someone who lived dangerously. I would build a life so safe, so stable that no one could ever take it away from me." "What if danger isn't who I am?" Luca asked softly, turning to face her fully. "Just what I do." The question was a key turning a lock deep inside her. He wasn't asking her to condone his choices. He was asking her to see the man behind them. The city lights blurred as her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing her cheek, a touch so tender it undid her. He leaned in, his gaze fixed on her lips. The air grew thick, electric with a year's worth of unspoken longing. She could taste the salt of her unshed tears, smell the leather of his jacket, feel the heat radiating from his skin. It was happening. A choice, a risk, a collision. Her phone buzzed violently in her purse, a jarring intrusion from the world below. The screen lit up with a name, Marcus Thorne, her ex-boyfriend, the prosecutor. The moment shattered. Eva pulled back, the spell broken. The phone was a cold, hard reminder of the life she had so carefully built, the promises she had made to herself. Luca retreated, his hand falling away, a mask of neutrality sliding back over his features. But she had seen him, and he had seen her. They drove back to the city in a new kind of silence, one charged with the weight of what had almost happened. They were falling, both of them, without a safety net, and every rational instinct they possessed was screaming at them to pull back. But for the first time, Eva was beginning to wonder if the fall was the only thing that could truly save them. The coffee Marcus Thorne placed on the table was a peace offering, but it felt like a trap. His prosecutor's ambition gleamed in his eyes, as polished and predatory as his expensive shoes. They sat in his sterile office, a place Eva had once seen as the pinnacle of her aspirations. Now it felt like a cage. "I know you've been looking into the street racing scene," Marcus began, his tone smooth as silk. "Impressive initiative. I have a proposition. Give my office some concrete information, names, locations, anything that leads to arrests, and I'll personally guarantee you a coveted spot in the DA's office upon graduation. A direct path, Eva. No interviews, no competition." It was everything she had ever wanted. Security, prestige, the ultimate validation of her choice to live a life governed by law and order, a life as far away from her mother's mistakes as possible. He was offering her the perfect escape hatch from the terrifying freefall she was in with Luca. All she had to do was betray him. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She thought of Luca's confession in the canyon, the raw vulnerability in his eyes. She thought of his hands on the steering wheel, the way he made a dangerous machine feel like a part of himself. The thought of using that, of turning his world into a bargaining chip for her career, made her feel sick. But the old Eva, the one who had survived on fear and caution, whispered that this was the smart move, the safe move. That night, the lure of the race was a siren's call she couldn't resist. She told herself she was going to say goodbye, to see it one last time before cutting it out of her life. She stood in the shadows of a warehouse district, the roar of engines a familiar, painful symphony. She held her phone, her thumb hovering over the audio recorder icon. She wouldn't use it for Marcus. She didn't know what she was doing. She was torn between two futures. And then Luca saw her. He was walking toward her, a rare, soft smile on his face, a smile meant only for her. Then his eyes dropped to her hand, to the phone angled toward the staging area, the screen glowing with the telltale red of a recording app she'd opened out of nervous habit. His smile vanished. It was as if a light had been extinguished, leaving behind something cold and brittle. The warmth she had come to cherish was replaced by a look of utter betrayal. "I knew it," he said, his voice flat and dead. He didn't yell. The quiet was so much worse. He stopped a few feet away, creating a chasm between them. Racers and their crews milled around, but they were in their own desolate spotlight. The law student, researching, "I was a fool." "Luca, no," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "It's not what you think." "Isn't it?" he challenged, his voice rising now, drawing attention. "Tell me, Eva, was our drive part of your research too? Getting the subject to open up? Were you recording then?" Each word was a physical blow. "I thought I knew you," he whispered, the heartbreak in his voice more devastating than any shout. Tears streamed down her face, hot and furious. "You do!" she cried, her voice raw with a pain that ripped through the crowd's murmurs. "You know the real me better than anyone, and that's what terrifies me. This," she gestured wildly at the scene, at him, at herself. "This isn't safe, it isn't logical, and I hate that I want it anyway." Her choice crystallized in that agonizing moment. It wasn't about a career or security anymore. It was about trust. It was about him. With a choked sob, she looked him dead in the eye. Her thumb swiped across the screen, a pop-up appearing. "Delete this recording?" She pressed delete. Then she opened her contacts, found Marcus, and held the phone up so Luca could see. She blocked the number, burning the most important professional bridge she had ever built. She had chosen him. Her actions screamed it. Luca saw it. He saw the sacrifice, his face etched with fury and betrayal, flickered with confusion, then with dawning, agonizing regret. He saw that his cynicism, the armor he wore to protect his wounded heart, had just cost them everything. He had accused her of the one thing she was fighting so desperately not to be. Before she could say another word, before she could explain the choice she had just made, the wail of distant sirens cut through the night. The crowd scattered in a panic. Luca's eyes held hers for one last desperate second before his instincts took over. He turned, sprinted to his Mustang, and the sound of his car door slamming shut was like a gunshot to her heart. He sped away, leaving her standing alone in the chaos, the flashing lights growing closer, the proof of her choice a useless deleted file on a dead screen. The garage was just as she remembered it, a concrete mausoleum smelling of ghosts and gasoline. But this time Eva wasn't there as a researcher or a trespasser. She was there to make a final plea. The sun had not yet risen, and the city was cloaked in the deep pre-dawn blue. She walked to the spot where Luca's Mustang was always parked, its familiar silhouette a dark promise in the gloom. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket. It wasn't a legal document, filled with cold clauses and formal language. It was a letter, written on a page torn from her personal journal, the ink slightly smeared from a single teardrop. In it, she had written everything, about Marcus's offer, about her fear, about the moment she realized that a safe life meant nothing if it was an empty one. She wrote that betraying him would have been a betrayal of the only part of herself that had ever felt truly alive. She tucked the letter under the Mustang's windshield wiper, a fragile white flag against the dark glass. It was a desperate analog gesture in a digital world. A message from her heart, not her head. She had no idea if he would even see it, or if he would simply tear it up, another piece of wreckage in the crash they had become. Her part was done. She turned and walked toward the rooftop access stairs, needing to see the sunrise. Luca found the letter an hour later. He'd spent the night driving, the engine screaming what he couldn't say, trying to outrun the image of her face, the sound of her voice choosing him. He'd returned to the garage, his only sanctuary, feeling hollowed out. Then he saw it. He read the letter once, then twice, his hand shaking. Her words dismantled his anger piece by piece, stripping it away until only the raw, aching truth remained. You know the real me better than anyone. That's what terrifies me. She wasn't afraid of his world. She was afraid of her own heart. He had accused her of being a spy when she was really a soldier fighting a war within herself, and she had chosen him. Over everything safe and sensible, she had chosen him. He took the stairs to the rooftop 2 at a time, and there she was. She stood at the edge, not dangerously, but with a quiet stillness, watching the first sliver of gold slice across the horizon. She heard his footsteps and turned. The fear was still in her eyes, but it was mingled with a fragile, fierce hope. "I'm still afraid," she said, her voice barely a whisper against the waking city's hum. He closed the distance between them, stopping just before her. "Good," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "That means this matters." He reached out, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his touch a question and a promise. "Let's be afraid together." Eva leaned into his touch, a sob of relief catching in her throat. It wasn't a promise to change each other. He would always feel the pull of the race, and she would always carry the weight of her past. This was a different kind of promise, a resolution to choose love, not in the absence of fear, but in spite of it. He kissed her then, and it was nothing like the frantic, interrupted moment in the car. This was a kiss of homecoming. It was slow and deep, a final, beautiful collision of 2 souls who had been racing away from themselves, only to find their finish line in each other. When they finally broke apart, the sun was bathing the city in a warm golden light. Eva looked from Luca's face to the Mustang parked just below the edge of the roof. "Teach me," she said. He looked confused. "Teach you what?" "How to drive it," she said, a small, genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. "Stick shift. I want to learn." He understood immediately. It wasn't about the car, it was about trust, about embracing a piece of his world, not with recklessness, but with intention. It was about learning to handle controlled danger, together. A slow smile spread across Luca's face, reaching his eyes and erasing the last of the shadows. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the keys to the Mustang. He didn't hand them to her. He dropped them gently into her open palm. The cool weight of the metal felt like an anchor. "Some risks are worth taking," he said softly, his fingers lacing with hers. "Especially the ones that lead us home." The girl in the glitter. The desert air at Coachella in 2011 was a thick, sticky blanket woven from sweat, cheap beer, and the cloying sweetness of vape smoke. For Ethan, it was the sound that was most oppressive. The bass didn't just vibrate in his ears, it thrummed through his ribcage, a relentless, synthetic heartbeat mocking the sluggish, heavy rhythm of his own. He felt like a ghost haunting his own body, invisible among the 50,000 shimmering, writhing souls who had come to the desert to feel alive. He had come here to die. The weight in his pocket was small but dense, a physical anchor for the decision he'd made weeks ago. A bottle of pills, carefully saved, meticulously researched. It felt like the only solid thing in a world that had become a blur of grief and colourless days since his brother's accident. The plan was simple, poetic in a way he knew was pathetic. He would wait for the final headliner to play their last encore, let the final chord fade into the vast, star-dusted emptiness of the Indio night. and then he would find a quiet corner of the sprawling polo fields and swallow the handful of oblivion. He would become one with the trampled grass and discarded plastic cups, just another piece of festival refuse. Golden hour was bleeding into a bruise of purple and indigo at the horizon. The neon lights of the art installations began to pulse with an artificial life, casting long dancing shadows that made the crowd look like a forest of phantoms. Ethan leaned against a metal barrier, the cool steel a stark contrast to his feverish skin. He closed his eyes, trying to dissociate, to float away from the crushing loneliness he felt in this sea of humanity. The metallic taste of fear, or maybe just resignation, coated his tongue. And then, silence. It wasn't a true silence, not with the main stage thundering a few hundred yards away, but a pocket of stillness opened directly in front of him. The world seemed to fall away, the cacophony muted as if someone had thrown a switch. He opened his eyes. A girl stood before him. She was a kaleidoscope of the festival itself, a living, breathing art installation. Her hair was a wild mane of electric blue, and her face was a canvas of starlight. Swirls of silver and gold glitter coated her temples and cheekbones, catching the strobing lights and fracturing them into 1,000 tiny rainbows. She wore a fringed vest and cut-off shorts, her skin tanned and radiating a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert heat. But it was her hands that he would remember most. They were covered in the same cosmic dust, and as she raised them, they seemed to trail stardust through the thick air. She cupped his face, her touch impossibly gentle, a shocking point of connection in his profound isolation. Her thumbs stroked his cheeks, and for the first time in months he felt seen, truly seen. Her eyes, a deep liquid brown, held his. They were kind, so impossibly kind. "You are a beautiful soul," she said, her voice a low melodic hum that cut through the noise like a cello string. It wasn't loud, but it was the only thing he could hear. "The world is better because you're in it." Ethan's breath hitched. A sob threatened to claw its way up his throat, but he choked it down. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. He could only stare into the universe of her eyes. This couldn't be real. She had to be an illusion, a hallucination brought on by dehydration and despair. She smiled, a small knowing curve of her lips. Then she leaned forward, and her lips, soft and tasting faintly of cherry lip balm, pressed against his forehead. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of benediction, a blessing. "Promise me you'll see tomorrow's sunrise," she whispered, her breath warm against his skin. And just as quickly as she had appeared, she was gone. She didn't walk away so much as dissolve back into the river of people, a flash of blue hair and shimmering light, swallowed by the pulsating crowd. He was left standing there, the ghost at the feast, with the ghost of her touch still tingling on his skin. He raised his own hands to his face, his fingers trembling. They came away sparkling. The cool glitter she had worn had transferred to his cheeks, his temples, his hands. It clung to him like a promise. He looked down at his palms, no longer empty but dusted with what looked like crushed stars. The final band took the stage, their opening chords ripping through the night. The crowd roared, a single massive organism breathing in the sound. But Ethan was no longer part of it. He was separate, cocooned in the memory of a stranger's touch. The weight in his pocket suddenly felt obscene, a profane violation of the sacred moment he had just been given. He turned and walked against the current of people surging towards the stage. He found a row of overflowing trash cans near the food vendors, the air thick with the smell of fried dough and regret. Without a second thought, without allowing himself to hesitate, he reached into his pocket, pulled out the small plastic bottle, and dropped it into the abyss of garbage. It made a dull, insignificant clatter as it landed. He walked away, his steps feeling lighter than they had in a year. Under the indifferent gaze of the moon, he held up his hands. The glitter was still there, sparkling in the darkness like stardust, like hope. The scent of aging paper and freshly brewed coffee was the first thing that always grounded Ethan. It was the smell of safety, of stories, of survival. A decade had passed since that night in the desert, and the cosy interior of Powell's Books in Portland was a universe away from the chaotic energy of Coachella. The rain, a signature Portland drizzle, misted the large windows, blurring the streetlights into soft, impressionistic daubs of colour. Inside it was warm, intimate. He stood at the podium, the final pages of his book trembling slightly in his hand. The book tour for The Glitter Girl had been a surreal experience. He had poured the last 10 years of his life into its pages, the raw, unvarnished story of his descent into despair, and the single miraculous encounter that had pulled him back from the edge. It was a memoir, but it felt more like a map of his own heart. And so, I live a life built on a promise made to a stranger, he read, his voice catching on the familiar words. The small, attentive audience listened with a hushed reverence that still humbled him. I never saw her again. I don't know her name or the colour of her hair when it isn't electric blue. But I see her in every sunrise I have the privilege to witness. I feel her in every moment of unexpected kindness. She was my shooting star, a brilliant, brief, burning light that seared herself into my memory. And this book, this life, is my thank you. He paused, clearing his throat before reading the final crucial line. This is for the girl in the glitter. I hope wherever you are, you're happy. I hope you're still seeing the sunrise. A wave of gentle, heartfelt applause filled the space. Ethan smiled, a genuine, grateful expression that reached his eyes. He answered questions, signed copies of his book with a hand that no longer shook, and shared anecdotes that were now polished from repetition. He spoke about his work as a suicide prevention counsellor, a career he had chosen as a way to honour the grace he'd been shown. The crowd began to disperse, drifting back out into the soft, rainy night, their signed books tucked under their arms. Ethan was packing his bag when he heard the hesitant footsteps. He looked up to see a woman standing a few feet away, clutching a copy of The Glitter Girl to her chest like a shield. She was nothing like the phantasmagoric girl of his memory. Her hair was a sensible shoulder-length brown. She wore a charcoal grey blazer over a simple white blouse, tailored slacks, and practical low-heeled shoes. Her face was pale, almost bare of makeup, and her expression was one of profound, gut-wrenching nervousness. She looked like an accountant, or perhaps a librarian. She did not look like someone who would cover herself in glitter and kiss a stranger at a music festival. "I'm sorry to bother you," she began, her voice a careful whisper, a stark contrast to the boisterous energy of the girl he remembered. "I know this is going to sound insane." She took a deep, shaky breath, her knuckles white where she gripped the book. "But I think I might be her, the Glitter Girl." Ethan felt the world tilt on its axis. The air in the bookstore suddenly felt thin, charged. He had dreamed of this moment for 10 years, played out 1,000 different scenarios in his mind. In his fantasies, she was always the same, a whirlwind of colour and light recognizing him instantly. But this woman, this quiet, buttoned-up, anxious woman, he studied her, searching for a trace, a flicker of the girl who had saved his life. He saw nothing of her in the muted colours she wore, in the controlled posture she held. The rain outside seemed to intensify, drumming a restless rhythm against the glass. "I was different to then," she said, as if reading his thoughts. Her eyes, he noticed now, were a familiar shade of deep liquid brown. "I was what I couldn't sustain being." She offered a small, self-deprecating laugh that sounded more like a sigh. "Life happens. I grew up. Or maybe I just folded inward." Ethan said nothing. He simply looked at her, truly looked. He looked past the conservative blazer and the nervous tremor in her voice. He looked into her eyes, and that's when he saw it. It wasn't a flash of recognition of him, but a flicker of something else, something deeper, a familiar light. It was the same depth, the same well of fierce, gentle love he had seen in the desert. It was older now, shaded with a sadness or a weariness he couldn't name, but it was unmistakably there. The ghost of the girl in the glitter, looking out from behind a stranger's eyes. The 24-hour diner was an island of harsh fluorescent light in the dark, rain-slicked Portland night. The air smelled of stale coffee and bacon grease, a world away from the literary warmth of the bookstore. They sat in a cracked red vinyl booth, a chipped ceramic mug of coffee between them. The woman, Maya, stirred her own cup with a methodical slowness, her gaze fixed on the swirling vortex of cream and coffee. "I became a lawyer," she said, her voice barely rising above the low hum of the refrigerators. "Corporate litigation. It's structured, predictable." She finally looked up, a wry, tired smile on her lips, the polar opposite of who I was at 21. Over the next hour, under the unforgiving diner lights, the story of her transformation unspooled. The wild child with electric blue hair had been a performance, a desperate attempt to outrun a grief of her own. Her mother had passed away a year before that festival, and Maya had thrown herself into a whirlwind of parties, music and reckless abandon, trying to feel anything other than the hollow ache in her chest. She was the life of every party, the girl who danced until dawn, the free spirit everyone adored. But it was a role she was playing, and the costume was heavy. "I was running on fumes," she confessed, her fingers tracing nervous, invisible patterns on the Formica tabletop. That night at Coachella, I was lost. I'd lost my friends, my phone was dead, and I was coming down from something I probably shouldn't have taken. I was just as lost as you were, Ethan, just in a different way. The pressure to be that vibrant, fearless person became unsustainable. A few years later, a series of crippling panic attacks had brought her carefully constructed world crashing down. The anxiety was a cruel tax on her wildness. So she had buried that girl. She'd cut her hair, dyed it a sensible brown, traded her festival wristbands for a briefcase and built a new life. One defined by control, by rules, by colour-coded calendars and quiet, predictable evenings. She had traded her glitter for armour. Ethan listened, his own coffee growing cold. He saw the immense courage in her confession, a vulnerability that was perhaps even braver than the impulsive kindness she'd shown him a decade ago. He felt a profound sense of connection to this version of her, this careful, wounded woman who had once been his saviour. It was his turn. He told her everything, not just the story from the book, but the gritty, painful details. The suffocating weight of his brother's death, the way the world had lost its colour, the cold, clinical finality of his plan. He explained how her 5 seconds of grace had become the cornerstone of his entire existence. "You didn't just make me see the sunrise, Maya," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that was 10 years in the making. "You gave me a reason to keep watching them. I went back to school, I became a counsellor. I've spent the last 7 years sitting with people in their darkest moments, trying to be for them what you were for me, a flicker of light, a hand reaching out in the dark." A single tear escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. "But I'm not that person anymore," she whispered, her voice cracking. The fear in her eyes was palpable. "I'm not a flicker of light. I am spreadsheets and billable hours. I have panic attacks if my grocery delivery is late. What if I can't be what that moment meant to you? What if I'm just a disappointment?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy and fragile. It was the heart of it all, the fear that the reality could never live up to the myth that had sustained him. Ethan felt a surge of protectiveness, a need to comfort the woman who had once unknowingly done the same for him. He looked at her, truly saw her, the tension in her shoulders, the carefully controlled expression that couldn't quite mask the vulnerability in her eyes. He realized he wasn't looking for proof of the girl from the festival anymore. He was connecting with the woman who had survived her. He reached across the table, his hand gently covering hers. Her fingers were tense beneath his touch. "Girl at the festival wasn't magic, Maya," he said, his voice soft but certain. She was hurting and she was lost, but she was still brave enough to be kind. That's the part that saved me. The kindness. He gave her hand a gentle squeeze. That's the person sitting right in front of me now. I can see her so clearly. She looked up from their hands, her gaze meeting his. The fear in her eyes didn't vanish, but it softened, making way for a fragile, dawning sense of being truly seen. For the first time all night, a genuine, unforced tear of relief slid down her cheek. She didn't wipe this one away. In the harsh fluorescent light of the diner, she simply turned her hand over and laced her fingers through his. The rain had returned with a vengeance, lashing against the windows of Maya's apartment in relentless, angry sheets. The apartment itself was a reflection of the woman she had become, minimalist, controlled, safe. The walls were a soft, non-committal grey. The furniture was modern and angular. There were no photographs, no clutter, no chaos. It was a fortress built against the unpredictability of life, and right now the walls were closing in. The weight of it all, the book, Ethan's story, the impossible burden of being someone's salvation, had finally broken through her carefully constructed defences. She was pacing the length of her living room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if to hold her splintering pieces together. Her breathing was shallow, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. A classic panic attack, a monster she hadn't wrestled with in years. "I can't do this," she gasped, turning to Ethan, her face pale with terror. He had followed her home from the diner, a silent, steady presence she hadn't known she needed, till this very moment. "I'm a fraud, Ethan. I'm not your glitter girl. I'm a lie." "Maya, breathe," he said, his voice calm and even, the counsellor in him taking over. He didn't move towards her, giving her space. "You're not a lie. You're here. You're real." "No!" Her voice rose, sharp with hysteria. "You don't understand." The confession that had been hovering at the edge of her thoughts all night finally spilled out, raw and painful. "The truth is, I barely remember that night. I barely remember you." The words struck Ethan with the force of a physical blow. The rain against the glass seemed to roar in his ears. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a chilling echo of the despair he'd felt that night at the festival. "I was so high," she continued, her voice breaking, the words tumbling out in a torrent of self-loathing. "I was lost and scared and running from my own ghosts. That whole period of my life is a blur of strobe lights and bad decisions. I remember the glitter, I remember the feeling of wanting to connect with someone, anyone. But the words, kissing your forehead, making you promise, Ethan, don't have a clear memory of it. It was probably just some drug-fueled, impulsive thing I did without a second thought." His entire transformation, his life's work, the very foundation of his recovery, was it all built on an illusion? Had he woven a grand, life-saving narrative around a moment that was nothing more than a chemical flicker in a stranger's brain? The thought was a black hole, threatening to swallow the last decade of his life whole. The girl who had saved him wasn't a mystical angel. She was just a high-party girl who didn't even remember her act of grace. The stability he had so carefully built felt like it was fracturing beneath his feet. He sank onto her minimalist sofa, the clean lines offering no comfort. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by Maya's ragged sobs and the drumming of the rain. She watched him, her own pain momentarily eclipsed by the devastation she saw on his face. She had saved him once by accident, and now she was destroying him with the truth. A desperate need to find something, anything, to prove that the moment was real for both of them seized her. "Wait," she whispered, a sudden thought cutting through her panic. She scrambled to a sleek, built-in bookshelf and pulled a large, plain storage box from the bottom shelf. Kneeling on the floor, she blew a layer of dust from its lid and opened it. Inside were the relics of a life she had locked away, old ticket stubs, faded photographs, and a stack of leather-bound journals. Her hands shook as she thumbed through them, searching for the right year. "I used to write everything down," she mumbled, more to herself than to him. It was the only way I could make sense of the chaos. She found it. A journal with a peeling peace sign sticker on the cover. 2011. She flipped through the messy looping script, her heart pounding. Her entries were a chaotic mix of song lyrics, frantic thoughts, and raw, unfiltered emotion. And then she stopped. Her finger rested on a page dated 2 days after the festival. Her breath caught. She looked up at Ethan, her eyes wide with a fragile, dawning hope. "Listen," she said, her voice trembling as she began to read. "Indio. So much noise, so many people trying so hard to be happy. It all feels so fake. But I saw this boy tonight, standing by himself near the gates. He wasn't dancing. He wasn't even watching the bands. He was just disappearing. He had the saddest eyes I have ever seen, like he was already a ghost. I felt this insane urge to go over there. Not to talk to him, but to just, I don't know, tell him he was still made of stardust. I wanted to save him. I wanted to tell him that whatever was breaking him, he was still whole." Tears were streaming down her face now, but they were not tears of panic. They were tears of validation, of memory, of truth. She looked at Ethan, her gaze clear and certain. "I may not remember saying the words, Ethan," she whispered, her voice thick but strong. The musty smell of the old journal filled the air, a scent of unearthed truth. "But I meant it. God, I meant every word." They had talked all night. The storm outside had broken, leaving behind a world washed clean, the air cool and sharp with the smell of wet pavement and damp earth. As the first hint of grey began to soften the edges of the black sky, Maya's apartment, once a fortress of sterile control, felt like a sanctuary. The open journal lay on the coffee table between them, a testament to the truth they had unearthed. "He made me promise to see the sunrise," Maya said softly, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips as she looked from the journal to Ethan. Ethan corrected gently. "She made me promise." It was his idea to go to the roof, a way to honour the original request, to close a circle that had been left open for a decade. They climbed the final flight of stairs and pushed open the heavy metal door, stepping out into the cool pre-dawn air. The city of Portland was just beginning to stir below them, a tapestry of dark rooftops and sleeping streets. A few lone cars moved like fireflies in the distance. They stood in silence for a long time, watching the eastern horizon shift from charcoal to violet to a pale, hopeful rose. The profound realization settled over both of them, not as a crisis this time, but as a quiet, liberating truth. He was not the broken boy on the verge of disappearing. She was not the wild, glitter-dusted girl running from her own pain. They had been saved, both of them, not just by each other, but by the passage of time and the hard, painful work of healing. And that was okay. It was more than okay. It was real. "I was so afraid," Maya confessed, her voice a soft cloud in the chilly air, "that you had fallen in love with a memory, a girl who doesn't exist anymore." "I think I did," Ethan admitted, his honesty stark and beautiful in the growing light. "For a long time that memory was the only thing that kept me alive, but sitting with you, the real you in that diner, and seeing you last night, fighting your own battles. Maya, the girl in the glitter saved my life, but the woman standing next to me now, she's the one I want to build a new life with." A wave of emotion washed over her, so pure and warm it brought fresh tears to her eyes. in a gesture that felt both spontaneous and deeply significant. She shrugged off the sensible cardigan she wore. Underneath she had on a simple tank top, and there, on her shoulder, was a small shimmering tattoo of a single star, traced in delicate, glittering ink, hidden remnant of the girl she thought she'd buried. Ethan reached out and gently traced its outline with his finger. It was a bridge between her past and her present, a quiet declaration that growth didn't mean erasing who you were, but integrating it. "You saved me once," she said, her voice full of a strength he hadn't heard before, a quiet echo of the girl at the festival. "By being exactly who you are, broken and beautiful, let me love you now, by being exactly who I am." As the top edge of the sun finally breached the horizon, spilling molten gold across the skyline, Maya reached into the pocket of her slacks. She pulled out a tiny corked glass vial. Ethan watched, mesmerized, as she uncorked it and tipped a small amount of its contents into her palm. Glitter, faded and less brilliant than he remembered, but unmistakably the same cosmic dust. "I kept some," she explained with a watery laugh. "A souvenir. Or maybe just a reminder." With a slow, deliberate tenderness, she dipped a finger into the stardust. She reached up and dotted a small shimmering patch onto her own cheekbone. Then she turned to him. Her hand was steady as she gently pressed a sprinkle of the glitter onto his cheek, in the very same spot she might have touched all those years ago. The sun crested the horizon, flooding the rooftop with brilliant, hopeful light. The warmth of her hand was in his, their fingers intertwined. The city was waking up below them, the sounds of a new day beginning to rise. They weren't preserving a perfect, fleeting moment from the past. They were creating a new one, a sunrise of their very own, built not on a memory but on a second chance. And in the golden light the glitter on their cheeks sparkled, a promise of all the sunrises yet to come. The charge between us. The fluorescent hum of Denver International Airport's Gate B-23 was a special kind of purgatory. It was the sound of limbo, of lives suspended between departures and arrivals. For Sophie, it was the soundtrack to her rising panic. Her phone, her lifeline, blinked a malevolent red. 2%. "I swear I packed it," she muttered, her voice a frantic whisper lost in the cacophony of rolling suitcases and garbled announcements. She was on her knees, the contents of her carry-on splayed across the vaguely patterned carpet like a sacrifice to the god of lost things. A well-worn copy of Invisible Cities, a tin of mints, a tangle of headphones, but no charging cable. Not the block, not the cord, nothing. Her flight to Chicago, the final leg of a journey towards a new life and a new job in urban planning, was boarding in 20 minutes. Her digital boarding pass, the email with her new apartment details, the contact number for the moving company, it was all trapped behind that dying screen. She sat back on her heels, the weight of it all pressing down. This was supposed to be a triumphant leap, the culmination of years of study and unpaid internships. Instead, she felt like a fraud, a disorganized mess who couldn't even manage the simple task of packing a charger. A tear of frustration pricked at the corner of her eye, and she swiped it away angrily. From a few feet away, Noah watched her. He'd been camped out by the only available outlet for the better part of an hour, a small fortress of technology humming around him. A laptop, a tablet, and 2 phones were all plugged into a multi-port adapter, their screens glowing with quiet efficiency. He was a cartographer of digital worlds, a freelance data analyst who could work from anywhere, yet often felt like he belonged nowhere. He recognized the look on the woman's face, not just the transient stress of travel, but something deeper, a bone-deep weariness, He'd seen it in the mirror enough times. "You look like someone who's carrying the weight of tomorrow on your shoulders," he said, his voice calm and even. Sophie looked up, startled. His eyes were kind, a soft hazel that seemed out of place in the harsh airport lighting. She gave a weak, self-deprecating laugh. "Is it that obvious? Right now I'd settle for just carrying the weight of a phone charger." Noah smiled, a genuine, unassuming expression that made the space between them feel a little less chaotic. He unplugged a sleek silver power bank from his setup. Its indicator light glowed a steady, reassuring green. "Here," he offered, holding it out. "Be my guest. It's fully charged." Sophie stared at the small device as if it were a holy relic. "Oh, I couldn't. You have a whole ecosystem there." "It's fine. Everything else is topped up. Think of it as a public service." He nudged it gently in her direction. "Sometimes the universe puts exactly what you need right in front of you." Hesitantly, she took it. The cool metal was solid in her trembling hand. "Thank you," she breathed, the words feeling inadequate. "Truly. You have no idea." As she fumbled to connect her phone, their fingers brushed, a fleeting electric touch that sent a surprising jolt through the exhaustion. Her phone chimed, the screen lighting up with the icon of a charging battery. The relief was so profound it was almost dizzying. "I'm Noah," he said, extending a hand. "Sophie." Her handshake was firm, a contradiction to the frantic energy she'd been radiating moments before. "So, what's in Chicago, Sophie? Or are you running away from something in Denver?" The question was direct, yet laced with a playful curiosity that disarmed her. "A little of both," she admitted, a real smile finally reaching her eyes. "New job. I'm an urban planner. I want to build cities that feel like communities, not just grids of concrete and glass." Her passion, so often buried under layers of anxiety, surfaced effortlessly. She spoke of green spaces and public art, of creating places where people could connect, not just coexist. He listened, truly listened, with an attentiveness that made her feel seen. He told her about his own work, how he found stories in data, mapping human behaviour through clicks and algorithms. They bought coffee from the nearby kiosk, the steam rising between them like a fragile truce against the airport's sterile environment. They talked about their shared love for old maps, for the way cities breathe and change, for the feeling of being anonymous and yet part of something vast. For the first time all day, Sophie forgot to check her phone. She was absorbed in the rhythm of their conversation, in the way Noah's brow furrowed when he was deep in thought, in the easy laughter that passed between them. Felt less like a conversation between strangers and more like a reunion. Now boarding, Flight 2317 to Chicago O'Hare. The announcement shattered the bubble they had built. The spell was broken. Sophie's heart sank. "That's me," she said, her voice small. "Right." Noah stood up as she gathered her scattered belongings, her movements now calm and purposeful. "The power bank," she said, disconnecting her phone, which now glowed a healthy 78%. "I need to give it back." "Keep it," he said quickly. "A welcome to Chicago gift." "I can't do that." "Sure you can. Pay it forward." Their eyes met, and in that shared gaze was the unspoken weight of the what if. What if this layover were longer? What if they weren't headed in the same direction, yet on entirely different paths? The air crackled with the potential of a story that was ending before it had a chance to begin. "Thank you, Noah," she said, her voice thick with an emotion she couldn't name. She clutched the power bank, its weight a tangible reminder of this fleeting, impossible connection. He just nodded, a lump forming in his own throat. He watched her merge with the line of travellers, a flash of her dark hair, a final glance back, and then she was gone, disappearing down the jet bridge. He stood there for a long time, the echo of her laughter still hanging in the air. the scent of her coffee mingling with the recycled atmosphere of Gate B23. He was surrounded by people, but for the first time in a long time, he felt utterly and completely alone. 6 weeks later, the city of Chicago glittered outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Lumina Gallery. The view was a breathtaking tapestry of light and ambition, a perfect reflection of the event unfolding within. It was a networking mixer for the city's rising stars in tech and design, and Noah felt like an imposter. He'd landed a lucrative contract with a major logistics firm, the kind of professional validation he'd been chasing for years. He had the sleek downtown apartment, the impressive title, the financial stability, yet a hollow echo followed him through the crowded rooms. He was adrift in his own success, a ship with a state-of-the-art navigation system but no destination in mind. He swirled the mediocre Cabernet in his glass, the clinking of ice and forced laughter a dull roar in his ears. He was charting data flows for a company that moved packages, but his own life felt static, stuck. His thoughts, as they often did in these quiet, lonely moments, drifted back to a fluorescent-lit gate in Denver, to a pair of panicked, intelligent eyes and a conversation that had felt more real than any he'd had since. He'd even found himself searching for her online, but Sophie, urban planner in a city of millions, was a needle in a digital haystack. It was a foolish, sentimental exercise, and he'd abandoned it after a few days. And then he saw her. She was standing across the room, bathed in the soft glow of a track light illuminating a large abstract painting. But it wasn't the art that held him captive. It was her. The frantic energy from the airport was gone, replaced by a poised confidence that seemed to radiate from her very core. She was wearing a simple, elegant black dress, her hair swept up, a single silver necklace resting against her collarbone. She was laughing with a silver-haired man, her head tilted back, her smile lighting up that corner of the gallery. She was transformed. She was glowing. Noah's breath caught in his chest. It couldn't be, but it was. The universe, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humour. He started moving toward her, a man compelled by a force he didn't understand. He navigated the clusters of schmoozing professionals, his heart thumping a frantic rhythm against his ribs. As if sensing his approach, she turned. Her eyes scanned the crowd, a polite, distant smile on her face, until they landed on him. The smile faltered. Her eyes widened in stunned recognition. The glass she was holding slipped from her fingers, a slow-motion catastrophe of red wine splashing against the pristine white wall and the floor. "Oh, God!" she gasped, mortified. Noah was there in an instant, grabbing cocktail napkins from a passing server. "Some things never change," he said, his voice a low murmur meant only for her, still causing a scene in a public place. Sophie looked up at him, her face a mixture of embarrassment and utter disbelief. A breathless laugh escaped her lips. "Noah!" The name was a question, a confirmation, a miracle. In the flesh. Together they mopped at the crimson stain, their hands brushing, the same spark igniting in the space between them. The silver-haired man, her boss, thankfully chuckled it off and moved on, leaving them in their own private, chaotic bubble. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I live here now," he said, his gaze locked on hers. "I could ask you the same thing, but I guess you made your flight." The intensity of the moment, the sheer improbability of it, was too much for the sterile gallery. "Let's get out of here," Sophie said, a sudden urgency in her voice. They found refuge in a small, dimly lit cafe around the corner, the air thick with the scent of roasted coffee beans and the mellow sound of a jazz piano. The city traffic hummed outside, a distant counterpoint to the quiet intimacy of their table. They talked for hours, the 6 weeks since their first meeting melting away as if they were a dream. He learned that the first few weeks had been brutal. The movers were late, her apartment was smaller than it looked online, and a crippling sense of imposter syndrome had nearly sent her packing. She confessed that the airport encounter had become a strange source of strength. "I wondered if I'd imagined how kind your eyes were," she admitted, her gaze dropping to the scarred wooden tabletop. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out the silver power bank. She placed it carefully between them, a silent testament. "I carried this with me every day," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "Like a talisman, a reminder that sometimes strangers can be kind, that things can work out." She looked up at him, her expression vulnerable and open. "That little battery didn't just charge my phone. It charged something in me I'd forgotten existed." Noah's carefully constructed walls of professional accomplishment and emotional distance crumbled. He saw past the poised woman from the gallery to the frantic, hopeful soul at the airport. He saw her strength, not in her newfound success, but in her willingness to admit her fear. He told her about his own emptiness, the feeling of being a ghost in his own life. The conversation was a mirror, each of them reflecting the other's hidden loneliness, their parallel journeys of ambition and isolation in a new city. He reached across the table, his fingers covering hers where they rested on the power bank. Its metal casing was cool, but their touch was warm. "Maybe we could charge each other for a while," he said, the words feeling both terrifying and absolutely right. Sophie's smile was like the dawn breaking over Lake Michigan. "I think I'd like that." The power bank sat between them, its small green light no longer just a symbol of a dead phone brought back to life, but a beacon of possibility, a signal, lost for a time, now found and shining brighter than all the city lights combined. The courtship that followed was painted in the warm, melancholic hues of a Chicago autumn. It wasn't a whirlwind of grand gestures, but a slow, deliberate exploration, like two old souls rediscovering a language they'd forgotten they knew. Their dates were conversations that spilled over hours. They walked along the shore of Lake Michigan, the waves a steady, rhythmic sigh against the sand, their shoulders brushing with a tentative electricity. They sought refuge from the crisp air in cozy, labyrinthine bookstores, sharing whispered secrets between the stacks, the scent of old paper and ink their perfume. They found themselves on rooftop bars, the city sprawling beneath them like a circuit board of dreams, their silences as comfortable and meaningful as their words. With each passing day, the current between them ran deeper, pulling them into uncharted emotional waters. One blustery evening, curled in a booth at a neighbourhood pub, Sophie laid a piece of her fragile heart on the table. "I've spent so long being afraid of wanting too much that I forgot how to want anything at all," she confessed, her gaze fixed on the condensation trailing down her glass. She spoke of a childhood spent trying to be perfect, of believing she had to earn her place, of always feeling like she was the understudy in her own life. Noah listened, his chest aching with a painful recognition. He in turn offered a piece of his own brokenness. He told her about his pattern, a self-sabotaging cycle of emotional unavailability. He was the one who always left first, a preemptive strike against the possibility of being left. It was a defense mechanism honed over years, a fortress built around the ghost of a past relationship that had ended in a spectacular, painful flame-out. "It's easier to be the one walking away," he admitted, his voice raw. "That way, you get to write the ending." That night, the air between them was thick with unspoken confessions and the potent promise of healing. He walked her home through a sudden thunderstorm, the sky splitting open with dramatic flashes of lightning. Rain plastered their clothes to their skin, and they laughed, feeling like the only two people in the world. Under the dim, protective glow of her apartment building's awning, the city noise faded to a distant hum. The scent of rain-soaked pavement filled the air. He leaned in, his hand gently cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. Her eyes fluttered shut. The kiss was a breath away, a promise hanging in the electrically charged air. But then she pulled back. A flicker of fear, of old habits, crossed her face. "I can't," she whispered, the word nearly stolen by a roll of thunder. "It's too soon. It's too much." Noah didn't push. He understood. He saw his own fear mirrored in her eyes. He simply nodded, his heart a heavy, sodden weight in his chest, and watched her disappear inside. The ghost he'd spoken of materialized a week later. Her name was Chloe. She was his ex-fiancée, the architect of his emotional unavailability. She'd heard he was in Chicago and had reached out, her text message a casual, devastating grenade. She wanted to meet for coffee, to catch up. Against his better judgment, driven by a misguided need for closure, he agreed. They met at a sterile coffee shop downtown. Chloe was just as he remembered, beautiful, sharp, and possessing an uncanny ability to make him feel like he was perpetually failing some unspoken test. She spoke of her regrets, of the mistakes she'd made, her words a carefully woven tapestry of nostalgia and subtle blame. She hinted at reconciliation, at the possibility of picking up the pieces. Noah felt the old patterns closing in, the familiar, suffocating comfort of a story he already knew the ending to. And from a table across the street, where she was grabbing her own afternoon coffee, Sophie saw them. She saw Noah's tense posture, the way Chloe reached across the table to touch his hand. She saw a history she wasn't a part of, a connection that predated her. It was a gut punch, a cold dose of reality that seemed to confirm her deepest fears. He wasn't a blank slate. He came with a past, a complicated, unresolved one. That evening, when he called, his voice strained. She was distant. "Is everything okay?" he asked, sensing the shift. "I saw you today," she said, her voice flat. With her, heavy scents stretched between them, thicker than the autumn fog rolling in off the lake. "Sophie, it's not what you think." "Isn't it?" she shot back, the hurt sharpening her words. "You told me you run. You told me you have a pattern. Forgive me if this looks exactly like the beginning of your next departure." Her voice cracked on the last word. "You don't get to be my exception and my patterns at the same time, Noah. You have to choose." The line went quiet, filled only by the static of their shared doubt. The deep, steady current that had been pulling them together had hit a snag, threatening to drag them both under. The argument hung between them for 3 days, a wall of wounded silence. Texts went unanswered. Calls went to voicemail. Then on the 4th night, the city itself seemed to intervene. A massive storm, a true Midwestern behemoth, rolled in off the lake, knocking out power to half of downtown Chicago. Sophie's apartment plunged into a sudden, shocking darkness. The hum of the refrigerator, the glow of her laptop, the digital clock on the stove, all silenced. All that remained was the howl of the wind and the percussive drumming of rain against her windows. And then a knock, soft but insistent. Her heart leaped into her throat. She fumbled for her phone, using its flashlight to navigate to the door. Peering through the peephole, she saw Noah's silhouette, his shoulders hunched against the gale. She opened the door. He was soaked, his hair plastered to his forehead, his face illuminated by the intermittent flashes of lightning. He held up a small paper bag. "I brought candles," he said simply, "and a peace offering." From the bag he produced 2 cannoli from their favourite bakery. She let him in without a word. Together, by the flickering light of a dozen small candles, they created a tiny island of warmth in the blacked-out city. The storm raged outside, but inside the world shrank to the two of them. The power outage had stripped away the distraction, the routines, the digital noise. There was nothing left but the truth. "I was ending it," Noah said, his voice low and steady, cutting through the silence, "with Chloe, for good. It was a conversation I should have had years ago. I'm sorry you had to see it. I'm sorry I made you doubt." In the soft, forgiving candlelight, Sophie's defences began to melt. The flickering flames danced in his eyes, and she saw not a man planning his escape, but someone fighting to stay. The intimacy of the moment, the raw, elemental nature of the storm made her brave. "It's not you I doubt," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "It's the role. I'm so tired of being the person someone chooses after they've figured things out. I want to be the reason they figure it out." She finally gave voice to her deepest fear, the one that had haunted her for years. "I am terrified that I am fundamentally unworthy of being chosen first. Sophie." He moved closer, his hand finding hers in the dim light. Her skin was cold. "Look at me." He waited until her glistening eyes met his. "In the dark, I can finally see who I really am, with you. I'm not that guy anymore, the one who runs. With you, all I want to do is run towards something." He leaned in, and this time there was no hesitation. His lips met hers, a kiss that was both a question and an answer. It was tender and desperate, a release of all the tension and fear that had held them captive. It was a power surge of pure emotion, lighting up the darkness more profoundly than any electrical grid ever could. In that kiss, he confessed his love, not with grand promises, but with simple, profound presence. "I love you," he murmured against her mouth. "I'm different now. We are different." They stayed up all night, talking, sharing stories by candlelight as city sirens wailed in the distance. They made love on the rug in her living room, a slow, sacred act of rediscovery. For one perfect, honest night, they were unshackled from their pasts, their fears erased by a tide of passion and vulnerability. Morning arrived with a cruel grey light. The rain had stopped, and with it, the magic of the night seemed to recede. And then, the power flickered back on. Lights buzzed to life, the refrigerator hummed, and Noah's phone, which had been charging on the counter, pinged with the notification. He glanced at it, his face clouding over. "It's from a headhunter," he said slowly, his voice sounding strange in the now bright room. "A job offer. My dream job, actually. Lead data scientist for a green tech firm." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It's in Portland." The words hit Sophie like a physical blow. Portland. It wasn't a neighbouring suburb, it was a continent away, a new city, a departure. The timing was so brutally perfect it felt like a cosmic joke. All her fears, all her doubts came rushing back, a tidal wave of insecurity. This wasn't a new beginning. It was the oldest story in the book. It was abandonment disguised as opportunity. Her walls didn't just go back up, they slammed into place, reinforced with steel. "Of course it is," she said, her voice dripping with a cold, bitter irony. "You're asking me to believe you've changed, to believe in this." She gestured between them. "You're asking me to believe in something I've watched fail over and over again, not just with you, but in my whole life." "Sophie, it's not like that. This is different. We can figure it out." "How?" she cried, her voice breaking. "With long-distance calls and holiday visits. I won't do it, Noah. I won't be the woman waiting by the phone hoping I'm still the dream when you're living a new one thousands of miles away." The beautiful, honest intimacy of the night before had shattered into a million sharp, glittering pieces. They parted with angry, wounded words, the kind you can't take back. He grabbed his jacket, his face a mask of hurt and confusion, and left. Hours later, after the tears had finally stopped, Sophie saw it. Sitting on her kitchen counter, forgotten in his hasty retreat, was the silver power bank. Its small green light glowed steadily, still charged, a silent mocking witness to the wreckage. 2 weeks, 14 days of suffocating sequence, 14 nights. Sophie had lain awake, staring at the ceiling, the ghost of candlelight flickering behind her eyelids. She'd gone through the motions, work, meetings, sketching out plans for a new park revitalization project. but her heart felt like a blacked-out city, cold and silent. The power bank sat on her nightstand, its steady green light a constant, painful reminder of what she'd lost. It was a symbol of their beginning, and now it felt like an epitaph for their end. She'd been so sure she was right, so convinced she was protecting herself. But as the days bled into one another, a different truth began to surface. Her fear hadn't protected her, it had imprisoned her. She had slammed the door on the one person who had ever truly seen her, not because of what he'd done, but because of what she was afraid he might do. She had let the ghosts of her past dictate her future. The realization was a painful, clarifying dawn. She had to fight, not for him to choose her, but for her to choose herself, the version of herself that was brave enough to trust. She booked a flight. Meanwhile, at Denver International Airport, Noah sat at gate B-23. The universe didn't just have a wicked sense of humour, it was a full-blown trickster god. His connecting flight to Portland was delayed. He stared out at the tarmac, the boarding pass in his hand feeling like a death sentence. He had taken the job. It was the logical choice, the next step on his carefully planned career trajectory. It was what the old Noah would have done without a second thought. But he wasn't the old Noah. The old Noah wouldn't be feeling this hollow, this gut-wrenchingly wrong. He had spent the last 2 weeks replaying that morning in Sophie's apartment, the hurt and fear in her eyes. He understood it. He'd given her every reason to doubt him. His whole life had been a training ground for her skepticism. But the night in the dark, the honesty, the feeling of finally truly arriving somewhere, that was the only data that mattered now. What was a dream job if it meant waking up alone? He pulled out his phone and typed a message to the headhunter in Portland, his fingers moving with a certainty that had eluded him for years. Thank you again for the incredible opportunity, but I have to respectfully withdraw my acceptance. He pressed send, just as a voice, hesitant and breathless, said his name. Noah? And he looked up, and there she was, Sophie, standing in the middle of gate B-23, looking just as lost and overwhelmed as she had the first time they'd met. She was holding out his power bank. He stood up slowly, his heart hammering against his ribs. Sophie, what are you doing here? Returning this, she said, her voice trembling. She placed the silver device in his hand. Their fingers brushed and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Turns out I didn't need it anymore. I finally figured out how to charge myself. She took a deep, shuddering breath. I realized that all this time I've been looking for someone to complete me, when what I needed was someone to choose me, every day, actively, intentionally. But I also realized I had to be brave enough to do the choosing too. And I choose you, Noah. Even if it's messy, even if it's scary. I choose the... Tears welled in his eyes as he looked from her brave, beautiful face to the boarding pass in his other hand. He ripped it in half, the sound a clean, decisive tear in the fabric of his old life. You're a little late, he said, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across his face. I already chose you too. He showed her the sent message on his phone. I turned down the job. I'm staying in Chicago. Some connections are too rare to sacrifice for a better view. The relief that washed over Sophie was so profound she felt weak in the knees. We keep ending up in airports together, she whispered, a laugh bubbling up through her tears. Maybe the universe is trying to tell us something about new departures. Or, he said, closing the distance between them and framing her face with his hands, maybe it's trying to tell us we're finally home. He kissed her then, right there in the middle of gate B-23, amidst the fluorescent buzz and the boarding calls for other places. It wasn't a kiss of frantic passion or desperate relief, but one of quiet, profound certainty. It was a promise. The familiar chime of a final boarding call for Portland went unnoticed. He held up the power bank, its weight familiar and freighted with new meaning. "I think this is yours, actually," he said. "You're the one who jump-started everything." She smiled, her eyes shining. "We'll share it." They walked away from the gate, hand in hand, leaving the ripped boarding pass on an empty seat. They weren't running toward a destination on a map, but toward the beautiful, uncertain, and gloriously charged territory of a life they would build together. In a world obsessed with staying connected, they had discovered that the most powerful charge doesn't come from a wall outlet. It comes from two people brave enough to plug into each other's hearts, knowing that real love isn't about keeping your battery at 100%, but about finding someone worth sharing your last percentage with. The Prince and the Pen Pal. The world felt muted to Lena Reynolds, the vibrant hues of her life having faded to sepia after her engagement ended. Her fiancé, a man with burgeoning political ambitions, had called her too ordinary, words that had echoed in the hollow spaces of her small New Jersey apartment for months. It was her colleague, a cheerful history teacher named Maria, who had pushed the application into her hands. Global Pen Pals, the flyer read, a bridge of words across oceans. "You have a beautiful soul, Lena," Maria had insisted. "Let someone discover it without any local baggage." So, on a crisp October evening, with a mug of cinnamon tea steaming beside her, Lena sat down to write her first letter. She chose a simple cream-coloured notepaper, one of the few things she'd bought for herself since the breakup. Her apartment, a cosy haven walled in by towering bookshelves, was quiet around her. The scent of old paper and brewing tea was a comforting balm. She looked out the window at the familiar suburban street, the sodium lamps casting a lonely orange glow. "Dear friend," she began, the scratch of her pen a small sound against the silence. "I've always believed you can know someone's soul by how they describe the view from their window. Mine is quiet. It's a street in a small town in New Jersey, where neighbours still wave and the biggest event of the week is high school football. It's simple, perhaps, but there's a certain peace in the predictability of it all. I'm a literature teacher. I spend my days trying to convince teenagers that words written centuries ago still matter. Sometimes I even succeed." Across the Atlantic, in a minimalist royal study in the heart of a European capital, Crown Prince Leopold adjusted the priceless signet ring on his finger. The room was a testament to his public life. Stark, elegant, and devoid of personal clutter, save for a few leather-bound architecture books tucked away on a low shelf and a small framed photo of a rugged coastline hidden behind a stack of official documents. He had stumbled upon the Pen Pal program during a late-night search for architectural forums, a desperate anonymous click in a life that was anything but. Every handshake, every conversation, every curated smile was filtered through the lens of his title. He was a prince first, a man second. He yearned for one relationship that wasn't a negotiation of power or a reflection of his crown. Using a pseudonym, Leo, and listing his profession as an architecture student, he'd enrolled, a quiet act of rebellion. He'd been paired with a literature teacher from America. Her first letter arrived on heavy official stationery, forwarded through a discreet service he'd arranged. He slit the envelope open with a silver letter opener, a gift from a visiting dignitary. The paper inside wasn't what he expected. It was soft, almost warm to the touch, and her handwriting was a series of elegant, forward-leaning loops. He read her words about the view from her window, and a smile, a genuine, unpracticed smile, touched his lips. He walked to his own floor-to-ceiling window, which overlooked the meticulously manicured palace gardens, a symphony of geometric precision and botanical perfection. Beyond the walls lay the ancient city, a tapestry of spires and rooftops he was destined to rule. "Lena," he wrote back, using a simple, unadorned fountain pen on thick, expensive stationery he'd purchased himself for this purpose. The view from my window is one of overwhelming history. I see stone walls that have stood for centuries and towers that have watched generations of my family pass. I am a student of architecture, and my passion is understanding how these structures were built, not just with stone, but with purpose and ambition. You asked about my soul. I think it's hidden in the blueprints, in the spaces between the stone, in the silent stories buildings tell. You teach that old words matter. I believe old stones do too. He carefully avoided any details that would betray him. The scent of beeswax from the polished floors, the distant muffled sound of the changing of the guard, the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders. Their correspondence became a lifeline for them both. They exchanged letters weekly, a slow, deliberate courtship of minds. Lena wrote about the fierce, unexpected beauty of a Sylvia Plath poem, of a student who finally understood the Great Gatsby's longing. She described the scent of old paper and glue in the library, the satisfying heft of a well-loved hardcover. Leo, in turn, wrote with breathtaking passion about the flying buttresses of Notre Dame, the impossible dome of the Pantheon, the genius of Gothic arches that reached for the heavens. He described the cold, smooth feel of marble under his fingertips, and the way sunlight filtering through a stained glass window could feel like a divine presence. He told her about his dream of designing not palaces, but public spaces, libraries, museums, places that belong to everyone. They built a world together, a secret kingdom made of ink and paper. Lena found herself checking the mail with a flutter of anticipation she hadn't felt in years. She would save his letters, reading them in the evening with her tea, his words painting pictures of a Europe she'd only seen in books. He was witty, intelligent, and carried a subtle melancholy she found herself wanting to soothe. Leo kept her letters in a locked drawer in his study. They were a burst of colour in his monochrome existence. Her observations were so beautifully, refreshingly ordinary. She wrote of grocery shopping and grading papers, of autumn leaves and the first snowfall. She was real, a vibrant soul living a life untouched by protocol or pretense. He felt more himself in his replies to her than he ever did in the gilded halls of his home. One rainy November night, Lena confessed, "I don't think I've ever told anyone this, but my favourite scent is petrichor, the smell of rain on dry earth. It smells like a fresh start." Leo read the line and closed his eyes, inhaling the sterile, air-conditioned atmosphere of his study. He longed for something as simple and profound as the smell of rain. He was a prince surrounded by every luxury imaginable, yet he felt a pang of envy for a small-town teacher who could find such poetry in a downpour. It was in that moment he knew his anonymous correspondence had become something more. He was no longer just curious, he was captivated, and he was terrified that the fragile, beautiful world they had built would be shattered by the one word he could never bring himself to write: Prince. 3 months of correspondence had woven a tapestry of intimacy so intricate that the distance between New Jersey and Europe felt like a mere technicality. The paper and ink had been imbued with a kind of magic, carrying not just words but confessions, dreams, and the subtle cadence of two souls learning to harmonize. The relationship was written in invisible ink, in the spaces between the lines where unspoken feelings resided. For Leo, life became a precarious balancing act. By day, he was Crown Prince Leopold, attending tedious council meetings, reviewing state documents, and smiling placidly at charity galas. His father, the king, was a man forged from duty and tradition, and the pressure on Leo was immense. He was expected to be a symbol, an unwavering pillar of the monarchy. But in the stolen hours of the night, he was simply Leo, an architecture enthusiast who found solace in the words of a woman he'd never met. He created a sanctuary for their connection in a secret garden on the palace grounds, a small overgrown alcove with a crumbling stone bench, forgotten by the royal gardeners. It was there he would read Lena's letters, the scent of wild jasmine a stark contrast to the formal rose gardens nearby. The ticking of the grandfather clock in his study became a countdown. each tick a second closer to the public announcement of his arranged betrothal to Princess Elise of a neighbouring principality, a political alliance that had been in the works since his birth. Lena's world, too, had shifted on its axis. Her weekends were now marked by a new ritual. She would drive to the coast, to a solitary lighthouse that stood sentinel over the Atlantic. She'd sit on the rocky shore, the sea breeze tangling her hair, and read Leo's latest letter. The lighthouse became a powerful symbol for her, a beacon of light cutting through the fog, a steady presence in a vast, uncertain expanse. It felt like him. He was her lighthouse. One crisp, wind-swept afternoon, emboldened by the liberating honesty their anonymity provided, Lena finally shared the story of her broken engagement. She didn't spare herself, writing of her own feelings of inadequacy, the sting of being deemed ordinary. "There's something freeing about confessing to someone who can't see your face," she wrote, her pen hesitating over the paper. "Sometimes I think we only become our true selves when nobody's watching." He wanted a partner who would shine beside him on a stage. I was always more comfortable in the audience, with a good book. Her vulnerability was a gut punch to Leo. He sat on his stone bench, her letter trembling slightly in his hand. He, who was never out of the public eye, who lived his entire existence on a stage, felt the bitter irony. He saw her pain and recognized a kinship in their prisons, hers of perceived ordinariness, his of gilded obligation. He wrote back immediately, his script more urgent than usual. "Lena, ordinariness is a far greater gift than you know. It is authentic. My life is complicated by family expectations. There is a path laid out for me, a role I am expected to play, and the man who writes you these letters is often at odds with the man the world sees. Your letters are the only place where I am not playing a part." He revealed the immense pressure he was under, the weight of a legacy, carefully cloaking it in the guise of a demanding family business, never daring to use the words crown or kingdom. The confession deepened their bond. They were two people trapped in lives that didn't fully fit, finding a perfect fit in each other. They discussed their fears, his of disappointing a father he both loved and resented, hers of never being truly seen for who she was. The turning point came on a cold, grey afternoon. The king had summoned Leo to the throne room, a place reserved for the most serious of matters. The air was heavy with the scent of old tapestries and the unspoken weight of lineage. His father, looking older and more tired than Leo had ever seen him, delivered the ultimatum. The engagement to Princess Elise would be formally announced in 1 month. It was not a request, it was a royal decree. The princess was already preparing to travel for the announcement ceremony. Leo felt the walls of his life closing in. The man he was with, Lena, the passionate, dreaming, authentic man, was about to be suffocated. That evening, standing at his study window watching the city lights twinkle into existence, he felt a surge of desperate rebellion. He couldn't lose her. He couldn't let Leo die without ever having truly lived. He pulled out a fresh sheet of stationery, his heart hammering against his ribs. The grandfather clock ticked ominously in the hall, each sound a reminder of the time he was running out of. His decision was impulsive, reckless, and utterly necessary. He wrote of a fictional architectural competition he was supposedly a finalist in, a competition that included a travel grant for a guest. It was a clumsy lie, but it was the only bridge he could think to build between his two worlds. "Lena," he wrote, his pen flying across the page, "this is perhaps the boldest thing I've ever done, but I must ask. The final stage of the competition is in my city. They have provided for me to bring one guest, someone whose perspective I value, who can offer inspiration. I know it is an impossible thing to ask. We are strangers, in a way, and yet I feel I know you better than anyone. Would you consider coming? I want to show you the buildings I've only been able to describe. I want to see the view from my window, with you standing next to me." He sealed the envelope, his hand unsteady. He was offering her a piece of his world, praying she wouldn't see the invisible ink bleeding through the page, the ink of secrets, of royalty, of a life that was about to collide with hers in the most spectacular and devastating way. He sent the letter, a message in a bottle cast into the vast ocean between them, and could only wait and hope. The journey felt like a dream. Lena held the heavy, cream-coloured envelope containing her plane ticket and a formally printed invitation to the Architectural Guild Gala. The embossed crest at the top was intricate and unfamiliar, but she assumed it was the logo of the prestigious organisation Leo had mentioned. Her heart, a frantic hummingbird in her chest, hadn't stopped fluttering since she'd read his letter. Yes, it was crazy. Yes, she was flying across the world to meet a man she knew only through his words. But his words had rebuilt her. They had taken the fragments of her confidence and pieced them back together with the patient mortar of understanding and shared dreams. She had to go. The flight was a surreal haze of recycled air and nervous excitement. She reread his letters, his descriptions of the city's ancient stones and soaring spires, now a map to a man's soul. She imagined Leo, her humble, passionate architecture student. She pictured him with the ink stains on his fingers, maybe a pair of glasses pushed up on his forehead, his eyes lighting up as he pointed out the genius of a particular archway or facade. She imagined their meeting, a quiet, slightly awkward moment at a cafe or a bookstore, a slow smile of recognition, the relief of finally putting a face to the words that had become her sanctuary. The plane descended through a blanket of clouds, revealing a storybook city nestled along a winding river, a landscape of terracotta roofs and majestic ivory-coloured buildings. It was even more beautiful than he had described. As she disembarked and made her way through the bustling terminal, a man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit holding a sign bearing her name approached her. "Miss Reynolds?" he inquired, his voice polite but formal. "I am here to escort you." Lena, slightly flustered, but assuming he was a car service arranged by the guild, followed him to a sleek black sedan parked in a restricted area. The luxury of the vehicle was her first prickle of unease. As they drove, the city unfolded around her, grand and imposing. They didn't head towards a quaint, student-friendly neighbourhood. Instead, they drove through ornate iron gates, past uniformed guards who snapped to attention, and into the sprawling, impossibly grand grounds of a palace. Her breath hitched. This wasn't a university. This was a landmark. "There must be a mistake," she said, her voice small. "The Architectural Guild. I'm here to meet a student." The driver's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. "There is no mistake, miss." The car pulled to a stop before a grand portico, and a footman in livery opened her door. Her legs felt unsteady as she stepped out onto the gravel, her simple dress and cardigan suddenly feeling foolishly inadequate. And then she saw him. He was walking down the grand stone steps, not in the tweed jacket she'd imagined, but in a perfectly tailored suit that spoke of immense wealth and status. He was taller than she'd pictured, his bearing regal and confident. He was devastatingly handsome, but it was his eyes, the same intelligent, slightly melancholic eyes she felt she knew from his letters, that made her world tilt on its axis. As he reached the bottom step, 2 guards fell into step behind him. The truth crashed down on her with the force of a physical blow, the family business, the expectations, the historical view from his window. It wasn't a lie, it was an omission so profound it felt like the cruelest form of deception. He stopped before her, his face a mask of anxiety. "Lena," he breathed, and the sound of her name on his lips was both a balm and a wound. Disorienting sounds of ceremonial trumpets blared from a distant courtyard, announcing some formal procession. The whispers of courtiers, who had paused to watch the exchange from palace windows, felt like tiny needles against her skin. "Who are you?" she asked, the question hanging in the air between them, heavy and sharp. "My name is Leopold," he said, his voice strained. "I wanted you to know me before you knew my title. Was that so wrong?" The question ignited a firestorm of hurt and betrayal inside her. "You had all of me," she retorted, her voice trembling with the effort to keep from shouting. "My real name, my job, my fears, my hometown. You had all of my ordinary, simple truth, and I had only a piece of you, a character you invented." She turned, her only instinct to flee, to erase this grand, terrifying reality and retreat back to the safety of her quiet life. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away from him, from the suffocating grandeur of his lie. She stumbled through an archway and found herself in a magnificent garden maze, the hedges towering over her, the scent of thousands of roses thick and cloying. She ran, taking random turns, the gravel crunching under her feet, tears blurring the perfect symmetry of the labyrinth. He followed her, calling her name. Finally, in a small circular clearing at the heart of the maze, he caught up to her, gently taking her arm. They were surrounded by blooming roses, a cage of impossible beauty, but there was no clear way out. The setting was a perfect cruel mirror of their situation. "Lena, please," he pleaded, his eyes filled with a desperation she had read in his letters, but never expected to see. "The man who wrote you those letters, that was me. That is the most real version of me." "The real you is a prince," she whispered, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. "And you let me fall in love with a ghost." She pulled her arm away, the weight of the formal invitation still in her purse, a mocking reminder of how naively she had walked into this gilded cage. The man she had crossed an ocean for didn't exist, and the one standing before her was a stranger who lived in a world where she could never belong. The days that followed were a surreal blend of opulence and heartache. Lena was given a suite of rooms that were larger than her entire apartment, with silk wallpaper, antique furniture, and a balcony overlooking the city. It felt less like a guest room and more like a beautifully appointed prison. Leo, caught between his royal obligations and his desperate need to explain, tried to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. He took her to the royal library, a magnificent 2-story rotunda smelling of aged leather and beeswax. "This is where I wrote to you most nights," he said, his voice soft. He showed her a hidden alcove with a comfortable-looking chair. "I imagined you here, curled up with a book, telling me what you thought of it." For a moment the prince receded, and she saw Leo, her pen pal, the man who loved the quiet stories of old buildings. But the moment was fleeting, shattered by the arrival of an aide with an urgent message from the king. Their time was a series of stolen moments, fragmented and shadowed by his public life. He would find her on a deserted terrace for a whispered conversation, only to be whisked away for a diplomatic reception. They were surrounded by priceless art and centuries of history, yet the only thing that felt real was the raw, unspoken tension that vibrated between them. The suffocating tightness of the formal gowns they provided for her mirrored the constriction in her chest. The emotional climax of this strange, suspended reality came at a grand state ball. Dressed in an emerald green gown she couldn't believe was hers, Lena felt like an imposter. The ballroom was a dizzying kaleidoscope of crystal chandeliers, orchestral music, and glittering jewels. And across the room she saw him. He was standing beside a strikingly beautiful woman with an aristocratic air and a practiced smile. Her name was Princess Elise, and Lena knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was the woman he was meant to marry. Elise's eyes, sharp and intelligent, found Lena in the crowd. She leaned over and whispered something to Leo. His gaze snapped to Lena, a look of profound apology and helplessness in his eyes. Later, as a sudden, violent rainstorm lashed against the palace windows, Leo found Lena on a rain-drenched balcony, the distant sound of the orchestra a melancholic counterpoint to the drumming of the rain. You should have told me about her, Lena said, not looking at him, her voice barely audible over the storm. It wasn't my choice, he replied, his voice ragged. It's an arrangement, a treaty. It has nothing to do with what I feel. And what do you feel? She challenged, finally turning to face him. The wind whipped a strand of hair across her face, and rainwater dripped from the stone balustrade like tears. In your letters, you were never the teacher, and I was never the prince, he said, stepping closer, his presence a magnetic pull she fought to resist. We were just two people who found each other across an ocean. Can't we find our way back there? Back to the lie? She asked, her heart aching. That place doesn't exist anymore, Leo. We're here, in your world, and in this world, I'm the ordinary girl from New Jersey, and you are a prince about to be betrothed to a princess. Before he could answer, a palace guard appeared at the doorway, his expression grim. Your Highness, you are needed. There has been a crisis. A dam has broken in the Northern Territories. The change in Leo was instantaneous. The conflicted man vanished, replaced by a leader. His voice became crisp, authoritative, as he issued a rapid series of commands. He turned back to Lena, his eyes filled with a new, urgent intensity. Come with me, he said. It wasn't a request. He took her to the palace's emergency command center. For hours she watched as he coordinated relief efforts, his focus absolute. He was compassionate, speaking with genuine concern to engineers and local officials. He was decisive, making difficult choices with a wisdom that seemed beyond his years. He wasn't just playing a part, he was serving his people with a fierce dedication she couldn't help but admire. She saw the weight of his crown not as a privilege, but as a profound responsibility that he carried with grace and strength. She was witnessing the man behind the title, the leader he was born to be, and in that crowded, chaotic room, amidst the crackle of radios and the urgent murmur of voices, Lena began to understand. The Leo she had fallen for in the letters, the passionate, thoughtful man who dreamed of building things that mattered, was not a fiction. He was right here, building something far more important than a library or a museum. He was holding his kingdom together, and her heart, which she had tried so hard to shield, broke open with a reluctant, painful understanding. She loved the prince as much as she had loved the pen pal. The day of the betrothal announcement dawned grey and heavy, the sky the colour of slate. The palace buzzed with a solemn ceremonial energy. In the royal chapel, flowers were being arranged, and a velvet-draped table was set up at the front, awaiting the signing of the official documents that would bind two nations and two people. Lena stood by the window of her suite, looking down at the lighthouse-like spire of the city's oldest cathedral. It seemed to be mocking her, a beacon that had guided her here only to abandon her in the fog of an impossible situation. Leo had sent her a note that morning, delivered by a trusted footman. Meet me in the old observatory at noon, please. She found him in the dusty, silent room at the top of the palace's north tower. Antique telescopes pointed towards the obscured sky, silent witnesses to centuries of cosmic events. Leo stood near a large celestial globe, his fingers tracing the painted continents. He looked exhausted, the weight of his impending decision etched on his face. He was dressed in his full formal uniform, the medals and sash a stark reminder of the duty that imprisoned him. My father collapsed this morning, he said, his voice flat. His heart. The doctors say the stress. He didn't need to finish. The implication was clear. If Leo defied tradition now, the consequences could be catastrophic, not just for the monarchy, but for his family. So you're going through with it? Lena stated, her own heart a leaden weight in her chest. I don't have a choice, he said, turning to her, his eyes pleading for her to understand. My kingdom needs this alliance. My father needs this peace. I do understand, she said, and the sincerity in her voice surprised them both. I saw you during the flooding. I saw the leader you are. Your people need you. I would never ask you to choose me over them." It was the hardest truth she had ever spoken, a sacrifice that tore at the very fabric of her being. He crossed the room in 2 strides and took her hands. His touch was electric, a desperate final connection. "But I love you, Lena. Loving you has made me a better man, a better leader. You taught me the value of authenticity, something the palace has tried to beat out of me my entire life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his signet ring, the one bearing the royal crest. He pressed it into her palm. "This represents the kingdom I was born to rule," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The metal was heavy, a tangible symbol of his burden. "And there is another kingdom, the one we built, with paper and ink, with honesty and vulnerability, is just as real, just as important to me." He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "Perhaps there's a way to honour both kingdoms, the one I was born to rule and the one we've built between us." A plan began to form in his eyes, a flicker of the rebellious student she knew, now tempered with the wisdom of a king. "Tradition is not a cage, it's a foundation," he murmured, almost to himself, echoing a sentiment from one of his earliest letters. "And foundations can be built upon." Down in the chapel the court had assembled. Princess Elise stood beside her father, looking serene and regal. The king, against doctor's orders, was seated, looking frail but determined. The moment arrived. Leo strode into the chapel, not with Lena, but alone. He walked to the front, his posture erect, his face resolute. He took a deep breath and addressed the assembly. He spoke of duty, of tradition, of his love for his country. He honoured the proposed alliance and spoke of Princess Elise with respect and admiration. Then he paused. "However," he continued, his voice ringing with newfound authority, "the world is changing, and our monarchy must change with it. True leadership is not about sacrificing personal happiness for public duty, but about integrating them. It is about being an authentic leader." He announced that he would honour the spirit of the alliance with Princess Elise's nation, creating stronger economic and cultural ties, but he would not and could not enter into a marriage devoid of love. He spoke of a new vision, one where his future partner would be a true partner, someone who understood both the common person and the crown. Then he looked directly toward the back of the chapel where Lena had slipped in, her heart pounding. "I have come to know a woman whose ordinary perspective is, in fact, the most extraordinary gift. A woman who has shown me that a kingdom's greatest strength is its connection to the people." He didn't say her name, but every person in the room felt the seismic shift in the monarchy's foundation. The resolution was not a fairy tale ending, but something more real, more earned. It was a compromise. In the months that followed, Leo, with Elise's surprising support, for she too longed for a life of her own choosing, renegotiated the terms of their nation's relationship. He began to modernize certain royal protocols, creating a charitable foundation focused on global literacy and cultural exchange, and he asked Lena to help lead it. 6 months later, Lena stood at the base of the lighthouse in New Jersey. The fog was thick, but the powerful beam cut through it, illuminating a path across the water. She heard footsteps on the gravel behind her and turned. It was Leo, dressed in simple trousers and a sweater, looking like the man she had first imagined. He held out his hand. In his palm was not the royal signet ring, but a simple antique key. "It's to the door of the Royal Library's new public wing," he said. "The one you helped me design." She placed her hand in his, their fingers lacing together. The ocean still stretched between their two worlds, but it was no longer a barrier. It was just water, and they had built a bridge. Some love stories are written in the stars, others in royal decrees, but theirs began with ink on paper, imperfect, smudged at times, but entirely ours. And perhaps that's the most royal thing of all. Two people choosing each other, again and again, across every border and boundary the world places between them. The lighthouse beam swept across them, a silent promise of a future they would write together, one authentic word at a time.